In the bustling heart of Harlem, New York, on a crisp autumn morning, the soulful Spoon Diner hummed with its usual symphony of sizzling platters, clinking silverware, and lively chatter. There, moving with a grace born of years, was Rosie, the diner's beloved waitress. With a steaming plate of grits and fried fish in hand, she approached an old man seated by the window, his worn cap bearing the faded emblem of the Vietnam War. "Here you go, Sergeant Wallace. On the house today," Rosie said, her voice a comforting murmur. The man, a familiar face named Clarence Wallace, a quiet elder from the neighborhood, looked up, surprised and deeply moved. "Thank you, sweetie. Lord knows I wasn't sure how I'd manage this meal today." From a back, a sharp, tailored figure abruptly rose. It was Richard Sterling, the new general manager, a young man with a polished veneer and an air of entitled superiority, brought in to modernize the classic diner. He strode furiously towards Rosie, his gaze cutting through the warm atmosphere, oblivious to the sudden hush falling over the tables. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" Richard snapped, his voice sharp enough to cut through the din. Rosie, though startled, stood her ground. "Mr. Sterling, Sergeant Wallace is a veteran. He comes every Thursday, and he's a little down on his luck. I just wanted to. This establishment is not a charity." Richard roared, his face reddening. Several customers, mostly black families who had been regulars for generations, shifted uncomfortably, their eyes downcast. Rosie, though her hands trembled, kept her composure, a quiet fire in her eyes. "He's a hero, sir," she insisted, her voice trembling but firm. "He sacrificed for this country. He has no family here, no one but this diner." Richard scoffed, crossing his arms, and then uttered words that sucked all the air from the room, leaving a chilling void. "He can take his heroism somewhere else. We don't serve that kind of trash here." The silence that followed was immediate, thick with indignation. Not just Rosie, but the entire diner seemed to freeze. Jaws dropped. Sergeant Wallace, his gaze fixed on his plate, seemed to shrink, as if transported back to a battlefield where he was once again deemed less than. Richard's voice sliced through the oppressive quiet again, this time pointing a finger directly at Rosie. "You're fired. Hand over your apron. Now." Rosie's eyes, welling with tears of disbelief and fury, dropped. She slowly untied her apron and placed it on the table. Sergeant Wallace looked up, a raw pain in his eyes, as if his last remaining anchor had been ripped away. No one in the diner moved, no one spoke. Only the heavy, suffocating silence of injustice filled the air. This wasn't the first time such prejudice had reared its head in their community, but this time it felt crueler, more brazen, more unpunished. A woman from a back, her voice barely a whisper, tried to intervene. "She only did what was right," she said. Richard turned his contemptuous gaze on her. "Do you want to leave too?" he sneered. A wave of fear rippled through the patrons. With tears streaming down her face, Rosie turned and walked towards the door without a backward glance. Sergeant Wallace tried to stand, to follow her, but his legs, weakened by age and war, wouldn't obey. He remained seated, mute, staring at a plate that had lost all meaning. The entire diner watched Rosie go, and no one knew what to say. The clock on the wall read 11:52 a.m. when the door swung shut behind her. Outside, the cold wind cut like a blade. Rosie stood for a few seconds under the spitting rain, half expecting someone to follow, to shout her name, to declare, "This is wrong." But no one came. No one raised their voice. Because in this world, sometimes good people fall silently, and it hurts that IT hurts because it feels real, because they've seen it before, been witnesses and perhaps accomplices to similar silences. Rosie walked aimlessly, clutching her apron, her mind reeling. She'd worked 18 years at the Soulful Spoon. She'd watched generations grow up, poured coffee for 3 families, listened to the lonely pour out their hearts. And all of it gone in seconds. Why? For offering a plate of food to a man who needed it? To a black veteran, dismissed as trash? Tears fell freely, not from sadness, but from impotence, from a boiling rage, from that searing pain that ignites when your dignity is snatched away and they don't even bother to look you in the eye as they do it. Meanwhile, inside the diner, Richard sat at Sergeant Wallace's table. "Finish eating and get out. Don't come back," he sneered. The old man didn't respond, just lowered his gaze and picked up his cap, the same cap he'd worn risking his life for a country that often saw him as less than. At that very moment, unnoticed by Richard, a group of uniformed men had stopped outside the diner door, observing the scene through the steamy glass, their eyes burning with contained fury. They were 4 active-duty Marines. All 4 stood motionless for a few seconds, dressed in their crisp dress blues, their faces hard as granite. The tallest one pushed the door open without a word. The rhythmic thud of their polished boots on the wooden floor immediately drew everyone's attention. Richard, still oozing arrogance, turned towards them. "How can I help you, gentlemen?" he asked, without a hint of courtesy. The Marines didn't reply immediately. Their gazes swept the room, landing on Sergeant Wallace, who was still fumbling with his cap, his hands trembling. The most senior Marine, a towering figure named Captain Miller, stepped forward, removed his own cap, and spoke, his voice a low rumble. "Who was it that humiliated Sergeant Clarence Wallace?" Richard let out a dry, dismissive laugh, attempting to exert his authority. "Humiliate? I was merely imposing order in this establishment. No one has the right to give away food here without my authorization, especially not beggars." One of the Marines clenched his fists. The atmosphere crackled with unbearable tension. A waitress dropped a mug, shattering the silence. Still, no one moved. The quiet returned, but this time it was different. A heavy, loaded silence, charged with simmering rage. Sergeant Wallace, still without a word, slowly lifted his gaze for the first time and nodded almost imperceptibly towards Richard. Yes, it was him. And these men weren't just customers. They were brothers in arms. "That beggar, as you call him," said another Marine, his voice resonating with controlled fury, "is the man who pulled us out of a firefight in Fallujah. If we're alive today, it's because of him. And you threw him out like he was garbage." Richard's face blanched. He stammered something about company rules and internal policies, but no one was listening anymore. The customers, who had remained silent before, now began to murmur, their indignation rising. An older black couple stood up and approached the veteran. "My son served with you, Sergeant Wallace," the woman said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for everything, sir." Meanwhile, Rosie, still walking aimlessly through the drizzling rain, knew nothing of the dramatic turn of events inside. She was consumed by the heavy sadness in her chest, until a car pulled up beside her. It was the same couple who had just thanked the veteran. "Get in, please, Rosie. You have to go back," they urged. Rosie hesitated, but the urgency in the woman's eyes convinced her. Soaking wet and trembling, she re-entered the diner, only to find something unimaginable. Every customer was on their feet. In the center stood Sergeant Wallace, flanked by 4 Marines. In front of them, Richard stood with his head bowed, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Captain Miller gently picked up Rosie's apron from the table, folded it, and handed it to her. "This place is worthless without you," he said respectfully. Rosie, overwhelmed, took it in silence, her eyes filling with grateful tears. Slowly, the room erupted into heartfelt applause. Not a performance, but a tribute to justice. Richard, desperate to regain control, shouted, "This is insane. I'm a manager here." Just then, Mr. Douglas, the original owner and a respected community elder, walked in. Someone had called him. He calmly approached Richard and said, "Pack your things. You're never setting foot in here again." Richard protested, but Mr. Douglas interrupted, voice firm, "We serve coffee here, yes, but we also serve dignity. And you, sir, understand neither." Richard was escorted out. The door shut behind him with finality. No cheers followed, just a deep, peaceful silence. Sergeant Wallace returned to his seat. Rosie, now calm and proud, served him a fresh plate. "Thank you, dear," he whispered. From that day on, every Thursday, the Soulful Spoon Diner reserved a table with a brass plaque, reserved for Sergeant Clarence Wallace and all who gave everything without asking for anything. Rosie still serves there, stronger and more dignified. Her clean apron and radiant smile remind everyone of the day dignity triumphed over cruelty. Customers return not just for the food, but for the reminder that doing the right thing, even when it's hard, matters deeply. Rosie didn't just reclaim her job. She regained her honor and the community's respect. Because some actions, no matter how small, can change everything.